Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to Temple United Methodist Church. On behalf of Pastor Skylar Rhodes, my name is Tyree Johnson. I welcome you to this wonderful afternoon with Jackie Speier in this town hall meeting. One of the things that we do here at Temple is to make sure everyone knows that they are welcome here, any time of day, 24/7. So you are more than welcome here, not just today, not just on Sunday, but throughout the whole week. We have all kinds of programs, Senior Center, Head Start, tutorial, Bible studies, whatever you like to do. So we're not just a church that just meets here on Sundays, but we are a place that, in our mission statement, is to serve all the people. Now, with that, when I say everyone is welcome, I have to add, not all behaviors are welcome. So, as in the golden rule, just do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Okay? So I know this will be an enlightening and hopefully spirited talk that Jackie has for all of us. But I just ask everyone just to be respectful in terms of time. And one area of respect would be if you have any kind of speaking device right now. Give us a phaser, put it on stun. And before I bring Jackie up, I just want to first thank all of her staff, Elena, Mark, Brian, Ryan, all of her staff who helped put this together. Please give them a round of applause. And the people here at Temple who helped put this together. If you could please just stand. A few housekeeping notes. The restrooms are in the back, and we'll have people to show you where they're at. Other than that, let me just go on and get started and introduce Jackie. Jackie Speier is the Congressman for the 14th District. She has also served at the San Mateo Board of Supervisors and with the California Assembly and State Senate. What she's also done is currently serving on the task force on gun violence that was just started a few weeks ago in light of the terrible incidents that took place at Sandy Hook in Newtown, Connecticut, as well as in Aurora, Colorado. Jackie's history in gun violence is personal. I know she will talk about it, but for those of us here who know the history of San Francisco, she was there at Jonestown, where she was severely wounded in a terrible incident. So I know she will speak to that as that has an effect on today's speech. Jackie also has a law degree from Hastings, right here in San Francisco. And she comes here today to not just give you what was going on in Washington, but to also hear from you. So with no further ado, let me introduce to you Jackie, Congresswoman Jackie.
Before I get started, I want to thank San Francisco's finest, led by Sergeant Mannix for joining us here today. And I've been told that our supervisor for this area, Supervisor Avalos, is here. Thank you very much. Tyree, please again extend our gratitude to Pastor Rhodes for giving us the opportunity to be here. This is, I think, the third town hall we've had here in this church, and you are always so welcoming that it's a great pleasure to be here. And being in a holy place is kind of comforting from time to time. So thank you very much. And thank you all for coming out for this town hall. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you. I am not going to spend a lot of time with opening remarks because this is really about an opportunity for us to have a dialogue. So you've received cards. You're encouraged to write your questions on the reverse side of the card and pass them to staff members who will be walking up and down the side aisles so that they will collect them and then start providing you with the questions. And then at the end, we'll spend about 10 minutes for just impromptu questions that you may have that will come in the course of our conversation here today. I just came from a gun buyback that I sponsored in San Mateo County with Supervisor Adrian Tissier and the Sheriff, Greg Humps. It started at 10. People were lined up at 8 a.m. It was a 2-hour wait. When I left, there were probably over 500 guns that had been turned in. There were quite a few assault weapons that were turned in. There were high-capacity magazines. I held one in my hand that handled 100 rounds of ammunition. I also held in my hand probably the most deadliest of the guns that we received, and it was called a street sweeper. And it's one that is very lethal, very dangerous. Shoots out bullets at a very fast rate. We also received sawed-off shotguns with the serial numbers scratched off. So clearly, probably guns that have been engaged in crimes that wasn't right. So it was heartening to see that people had made a decision to get rid of guns they don't need. For everyone, it's very important to underscore the fact that the Second Amendment is indeed etched into our Constitution, that everyone has the right to own guns if they are legally eligible to own guns. And that Second Amendment is protected more recently by a Supreme Court decision entitled Keller, where it made it very clear that everyone has the right to own guns. And having said that, though, that there are opportunities for the government to limit certain types of guns. And we have an expert here, Professor Donahue from Stanford, who will get into that issue if you have particular questions on it. So, I do serve on the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force. We will be making recommendations to the Democratic Caucus on areas that we think are particularly valuable to make sure we incorporate in any new amendments for gun violence prevention. I also serve on the House Armed Services Committee and also on the House Government Reform Committee, Government Oversight and Reform. And that particular committee, I have just been named as ranking member of a subcommittee on energy, healthcare, FDA, food policy, and entitlements. So on that committee, we will have jurisdiction over all those issue areas for the purposes of doing oversight hearings. So it really captures a great area of interest for me and I think for the American people generally. So the 14th Congressional District has changed from the 12th Congressional District. Some people in San Francisco that were in the district before the sunset are no longer in the district. Obviously this area is in the district, St. Francis Woods, Lakeside, southwest quadrant of the city, a little less than the southwest quadrant of the city, and then most of San Mateo County. To Menlo Park, includes East Palo Alto, and Half Moon Bay on the coast. It also is home to the Farallon Islands as part of the district, although no one that lives out there, so it's there only to be protected. And I'm the proud representative of the San Andreas Fault. So, having said all that, I look forward really to opening this up to questions on issues that are most interesting to you.
A lot of questions I got.
Okay. You know, why don't you read these?
Okay, sure.
And then I won't have to swim.
Okay. This question is about the VA. Need some AV help here.
It's on.
Is it on? Okay. All right, thank you. Why does the VA take so long to process medical claims, and how can it be remedied?
Okay, I have taken this issue on head on. I went and visited the VA offices in Oakland. I sat down with management. I told them that their record was unacceptable on any level and it had to change. Oakland and Los Angeles have the worst record in the country, in terms of the delays from the time a claim is filed and the time a claim is actually approved. Now, they're supposed to be adjudicated within 150 days. There are veterans waiting over 2 years in this region for disability claims. So, before Supervisor leaves, I want to give him an opportunity to say a few words. So, would you be willing to stay? Do you have to go on? Because I was going to give you an opportunity to say a few words.
This is your town hall. I'm sure a little bit later. I have kids here going in and out watching that.
Got it. Okay, we'll give you an opportunity later. So, the problem is one of resources, management, and focus, I believe. And the fact that most of these records are not electronically transcribed, so they're all paper files. So when I walked through the Oakland office, there were files this thick. Imagine a claim adjuster looking through page after page after page. So we had a fix-it meeting here in San Francisco. 250 veterans showed up. One of the veterans was a World War II veteran who had served at the Battle of the Bulge and D-Day. He was 91 years old, and he was being told by the VA, since his claim had been filed 2 years ago, he had to go back to his doctors for a reassessment. And I said to the VA, wait a minute, this is your fault that he's waited 2 years. You're not going to have him be reassessed. I got a phone call within 10 days. His claim had been adjudicated. He was getting a 100% disability claim. And it created an opportunity for him to get some in-home health care as a result. So since we took this issue on last March, more than $3 million have come to veterans in this region that have been waiting for a long period of time. I think that's the fundamental responsibility of my job, to make sure that federal government works for my constituents. And I would like to see my colleagues do it in other areas where there is such a long delay. But we're not out of the woods, because there's a lot of people that don't come to my office with their complaints and are waiting. There's a lot of homeless vets out there that have disability claims that are pending, having been reviewed. One of the individuals at the Fix-It meeting was a Purple Heart recipient, and they were questioning whether he had PTSD. So, a lot of work still to be done in that area.
Okay. What is your office planning to do to pass comprehensive immigration reform?
Okay, immigration reform. There will be a comprehensive bill on immigration reform this year. I don't think there's any question about it. The President, as you know, by executive order, has already put in place the DREAM Act. Those are for young people in school, keep good grades, that want to be educated here. And that they can stay here without fear of being deported. So, the rub will come between the Democrats and the Republicans who look at immigration reform differently. I believe that immigration reform needs to create a pathway to citizenship. Now, I don't think you just get to have that pathway to citizenship without first proving yourself, without paying a fine, without getting in the back of the line. But I do think you have to have a pathway to citizenship. Republicans want to provide green cards to everyone who's here illegally, but never give them a pathway to citizenship. That doesn't make sense in a country that is made up of immigrants and has, through many, many centuries now, been one that has embraced immigrants from other countries. So, immigration reform will take place, as I said. The rub is going to be on how we negotiate these pathways, which I think is interesting.
There's quite a few questions in here about guns.
Okay.
So I'm going to
Start
answer a couple
addressing
of them. And if I don't read your question, that means it's because someone else has already asked that, so I'm coupling some of them together. Second Amendment protects the right of the individual to be strong in the face of both criminals and threats. Wouldn't limiting that right make the individual weaker and less able to protect themselves?
So, there is no effort underway in the Congress of the United States to limit the right of every American who wants to legally own a gun for protection or for recreation to do so. There will be a debate this year on whether or not every person or any person should be allowed to have an assault weapon. An assault weapon is a military-style weapon that is used for one purpose and one purpose only. And that is to kill people quickly, and that does not necessarily have a place. It creates just mammoth destruction. So, I don't know, Professor, if you'd like to say a few words about the Heller decision at this point, that might be a good opportunity to talk about it. Professor is from Stanford University, has done a lot of, maybe give a few of your credentials.
Hello, I'm John Donahue. I teach at Stanford Law School, and I do research in the area of criminal justice policy and gun violence in particular, and I have a PhD in economics as well as a law degree. So the question was about the Heller decision, and of course the Heller decision did state for the first time in our nation's history that there was a private right to have guns, so that has now been established by a 5-4 decision of the U.S. Supreme Court. And questions have been raised about whether some of the measures that have been suggested for reducing gun violence would jeopardize that right. And I think it's pretty clear if you read the Heller decision that the Supreme Court has said that there is a great room for reasonable regulations. In fact, the language of the statute should be kept in mind. It's of the constitutional amendment. It says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So the amendment itself refers to regulation, and indeed, as you look across the world, rich countries have largely managed to reduce their homicidal violence to a relatively low level. And the one country among the richest nations, the richest 25 nations in the world, that stands out as an outlier with much higher rates of criminal violence is the United States. And so we have to acknowledge that the gun problem is a part of that very high rate of homicidal violence. And so steps have to be taken to address the gun problem. I know the NRA at times tries to suggest that we're sort of in the middle of the pack, as though we're not an outlier. But we're in the middle of the pack if you look at poor countries that essentially don't have a functioning governmental system. When it comes to rich countries, we're way above what our competitor nations live with in terms of criminal violence. So measures need to be taken, and I think that the measures that have been proposed, really the only question is what is effective, because none of the measures that I've heard discussed, certainly nothing by the president, came anywhere close to the line of what would be prohibited by the Second Amendment.
Professor referenced the, I think it's 23 wealthiest countries in the world. And of those, the United States is distinguished because 80% of the gun deaths come here in the United States. Now, the proposals that have been offered by the president are as follows: ban on assault weapons, a ban on high-capacity magazines, universal criminal background check. Those are the three, I think, most significant. Now, I'm also introducing a number of bills on this issue. One of the elements that has really happened over the last, I'd say, 8 years is an erosion of the existing laws. Now, I'd like to actually read you one particular, because it's very compelling. I have it here, I may not have it here. One of the issues is that of tracing crime guns. And for all intents and purposes, that was shut down in an amendment in 2003 by a congressman named TR. It's called the TR Amendment. And it basically said that you could no longer trace crime guns. The result is that bad actors out there, those gun dealers that aren't playing by the rules, can't be sanctioned. And there is a particular gun dealer, his name was Sandy Adams, is Sandy Adams. He had a gun store, and they were able to trace hundreds, I think it was over 400 crime guns that were sold in the store. So once that happened, there were efforts underway to prevent the tracing of those guns. It's very critical to be able to trace crime guns, and if there are 1% of the gun dealers are responsible for almost 60% of the guns that are implicated in crimes, then why would we want to get them out of business? So my bill will allow that to take place. We want responsible people accessing guns. We want responsible people selling guns. And if you don't fall into those two categories, you shouldn't be engaged in the gun exchange. I'm also introducing a bill that would prevent the importation of assault weapons and magazines. We saw a lot of guns this morning, and I'm going to be interested to find out how many of those assault weapons are imported.
From out of the United States?
Yes. George H.W. Bush, when he became president, by executive order, banned the importation of assault weapons. When President Bill Clinton got elected, by executive order, he banned high-capacity magazines. When President George W. Bush got elected president, by executive order, he relaxed all of those restrictions. So the importation of guns and high-capacity magazines today is allowed. President Obama hasn't done anything to restrict the importation of guns and high-capacity magazines and assault weapons. So I'm introducing a bill that would require that to take place.
Okay, I'm just going to make a statement from the audience and then a follow-up question, again on guns, and then we'll move on to another topic. California has the strongest gun laws and have reduced gun deaths by 50% since 1993. The problem comes from neighboring states that guns that come in from there. That's why we need a federal law. And then a follow-up question to that is, how can Californians best champion the efforts towards firearm safety and gun control nationally?
Okay, valid point. Guns come across the border from Nevada and Arizona frequently, and that's how a lot of the illegal guns end up here in California. A universal criminal background check is critical, and that has to be nationwide in order for it to be effective. And beyond that, every state has to provide to the federal NICS system, it's called, Instant Criminal Background Check System. All states have to provide their criminal data in terms of persons who have committed felonies, who have committed misdemeanor, domestic violence convictions, and persons who have been deemed to be mentally defective. Now, to be deemed mentally defective is a very high bar. So, unless all that information is shared with the national database, then you're going to have people who shouldn't have guns have guns. In California, there are 19,000 persons right now walking around with guns that are prohibited from having guns. And every time the AG's investigators go out, access those guns and bring them in, they can't stay ahead of it. For every year, there's 2,500 guns that are taken out of circulation for persons who shouldn't have them, who are legally prohibited from having them. But there's another 3,000 that go into that system of persons who shouldn't have guns that are advertised. So that's why that universal criminal background check is so important. In terms of what you can do, you need to communicate, not just with me, but with people you know around the country, your friends, your family. The importance of bringing back some sanity to these enforcement laws that we have on the books that have been eroded over a number of years. There's no reason why a criminal background check should be destroyed in 24 hours. How can you track straw purchaser if you're going to destroy that background check in 24 hours? You should be able to keep that background check for a reasonable period of time. Here in California, I think it might be, I don't know what it is here. It should be a minimum of 90 days.
Okay, we're going to move on to another topic. We'll probably come back to guns because it's on everyone's mind, but shifting to finance. Since the Glass-Steagall law has been taken down by Gramm-Leach-Bliley legislation, you have co-sponsored Marcy Kaptur's H.R. 1489 to reinstate Glass-Steagall. The reinstatement of Glass-Steagall has again been introduced. Will you co-sponsor that bill?
Yes. Let's move on. Are most of you familiar with, who isn't familiar with what Glass-Steagall is? You are. All right, let me just briefly tell you what it is. In the 1930s, right after we had the meltdown of Wall Street and the Great Depression, the Glass-Steagall Act was put into law, which basically prevented banks from owning insurance companies from owning securities firms. And that firewall prevented any kind of mischief. In 1989, the Modernization Act was passed by Congress and signed by President Clinton, which basically created this financial marketplace in which banks could own insurance companies, could own securities firms, and it was all about the global marketplace and how we had to be able to engage in the global marketplace. So that's 1989. I'm sorry, you're absolutely right, 1999. Long decade, 1999. And then, what else did we do? Well, there was a great leader. Her name was Brooks Liborn. She was a Stanford graduate of law school, was the first woman to lead the law review. She goes to work in Washington, D.C., knows a lot about derivatives. She is appointed by President Clinton to the Commodities Future Trading Commission. She looks at this and she thinks, oh my goodness, we should probably do some kind of a survey, find out whether or not we should have some form of regulation. Well, the likes of Summer and Rubin and Levitt and Greenspan all kind of got together and said, what is she doing here? In fact, she tells a great story. I took her to lunch in the members' dining room one day, and she tells a story about how she was appointed, got into office, then the head of the Fed, Mr. Greenspan, invited her to lunch. They had lunch, I guess, in his office, and his whole point to her was, don't deal with fraud. The marketplace will take care of fraud. All right, she lasted there maybe 4 years because she wanted to regulate derivatives. And then what did Congress do? We passed the law, it's before my time there, but we passed the law that basically tied the hands of Congress from regulating derivatives. And then there were 2 more decisions. One decision that basically provided that those persons working in securities firms did not have a fiduciary duty to their clients. And then yet another regulation that basically changed the amount that could be leveraged. So it was 15 to 1, and they took the cap off. So what happened? When all hell broke loose in this country, many of these financial institutions were leveraged for you. So Glass-Steagall worked for all those years. We relaxed that, and within literally less than 10 years, the entire financial system came to its knees, and it impacted every one of our lives. Every one of our lives. So, long story about Glass-Steagall. Next question.
We have a few questions about the topic of gerrymandering, so I'm going to put them together. Republicans control the House through gerrymandering in many states, disenfranchising many voices in those states, votes in those states. How do we change that?
We've changed the reapportionment has always been a political process. And everyone has basically said, well, it's political, of course there's going to be forced rate. Well, in California, because of the initiative, people rose up and said we should have a citizens commission. And the result was it was passed, it became law, it was exercised, and this is the first reapportionment that wasn't done by the state legislature, but by the people of the state. And the result is pretty interesting here in California. I think we picked up either 4 or 5 seats, I mean the Democrats, in part because when reapportionment was done before, it was a deal that was cut between the Democrats and Republicans. And the Republicans wanted to maintain the number of seats they had, and the way to cut that deal was to just negotiate the status quo. Well, the status quo actually hurt Democrats in this state because the Democrats outnumber Republicans by such a significant number. If you took a citizens commission model, like we have here in California, and made that the national model, you would have less of the politicking that goes on. And it really depends on who's in power. The Democrats who are in power, they've been drawing the lines to their advantage. In many of these states, the Republicans are in power, and so they drew the lines to benefit their party. I think we've got to take it out of this political process and just say, you know what? Let the citizens take into account civil rights laws about making sure districts are reflective of the population and that they're not marginalizing certain groups, but that do it outside of the legislative arena. And I would be supportive of that if we went that route. But it would take a constitutional amendment, take 2/3 vote of the House and the Senate, and then 3/4 of the states would have to pass.